Boom, according to that, I am live. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight. My name's Hiko Simon. It is 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. And like every week, I am here. I've just been watching, actually, Travelers on Netflix. I started watching. I thought it was a movie. It turned out it's a series. And I watched a few episodes. And normally I would have prepared the topics like an hour out. But I wanted to watch just one more episode. So yeah, it must be interesting. Yeah, I'm quite enjoying it. I don't know, it's great, but it's pretty good. So the result is I picked all the topics for this 15 minutes ago. Somehow I'm actually on time, so maybe I shouldn't do that every week. But it's excellent to see Shubas from Panama here first. Good to have you here. And Quint Rackett. I guess Shubas, you get to see all the silliness that you that you often miss, which is just me messing around saying hello to everybody. I see we've already got 6 people watching. Please do say hello if you're here. It's a highlight of the show for me is saying hello to you all. Let me actually just bring around the other monitor so I can actually, it's funny, I'm looking over here on the screen. I'm actually looking, it's like I'm actually reading the comments, like as you can see it on the screen. This is where they are. So yeah, yabba dabba do. Indeed, we've got Quint Ranked. Boom, good to have you with us. We got Matty. You made it on time for once. Hey, everybody seems on time. I'm amazed that I was on time, to tell you the truth. Yeah, Netflix is a dangerous drug. What can I say? Mr. Cordy Champ, will my timing be better this week? Hey, my timing is bad every week, and I pride myself on consistency. Brianna W, good to see you. Hello indeed. One Johnson, hello, good to see you, and good to see everybody. There's actually, you know what? As I went through all the topics just before, Barry Convex, hello, good to see you. Chelm 9. Nice to see One Johnson and Shelm 9, some less familiar handle names. So excellent to see you, and thank you for saying hello. Linus 360, hello Gen X competition. I think if Gen X had a competition, I don't know. I was never into Mountain Dew, so perhaps I wouldn't win, but you know, I'm up there. Guys, English World, good to see you. Guy kicked my ass last night. Last night when we were playing Among Us, the fact that you called Nesta and I like immediately, and it was actually correct. Yes, thank you. That was very well done. Dave Hunter, good to see you. Good to see everybody. Remember, as you rock in, say hello. It's lovely to see you all. Also, remember, if you want to get my attention, just say my name, Hiko Simon. It turns out you don't even have to at mark anymore. You just sort of type it, and it's there. So you can do that, and I will notice it. But Papa Power. Actually, you know, Papa Power, someone was to say yabba dabba do up there. I think, oh no, that was Puppy Power. That was what Scrappy Doo used to say. But still, you know, Papa Power, good to have you here in the chat. Boom indeed. Good morning to the people in the Western Hemisphere. I think that's what they call it. The people over there in America and the Americas and whatnot. Good to see you. Yeah, people rocking into the chat. I've got a bunch of topics. Most of the topics tonight are the goings on with relation to COVID-19. We've just started, of course, the new round of states of emergencies, if that's okay and you don't mind, please. Sorry very much. That Japan does. They're trying a different flavor. They're trying prohibitionist. They're sort of, at the moment, it feels like maybe they're just going back to the 1919 pandemic playbook and they're just pulling moves. Dan H, good to see you. Hope that you are well as well indeed. And yeah. So yeah, we are now officially in a new state of emergency. Such as that is a thing in Japan, of course. There are no real coercive lockdowns, but it is interesting. We'll talk about this, but there are more coercive things happening than before. In fact, that actually just made me remember a story which I don't think I tagged, where there was actually a list of all the things that are shut down. But I think I can summarize it well enough. But yeah, the topics are not ordered. They're pretty much just from the start of the week through to today in reverse, or basically in sequential order. So we'll go through it in that order. And yeah, hope everyone's good. Just to repeat again, if you've got questions or topics you'd like me to cover, I'm always happy to do that. So just mark me so I catch it. And yeah, if you haven't said hello yet, please say hello. Also, remember, if you like, I do appreciate it, and subscribe. Actually, that's always nice as well. Make sure that you'll catch it. And big shout out. I don't know if Aaron is in here yet, but thanks again to Aaron for doing the edits of the videos through the week. I kind of lost my shit slightly last week when I was talking about Prince Philip. I appreciated her actually editing that and allowing me to watch it back in that way. It was actually kind of fun. I mean, you know, essentially, There's a lot of tangents you can go on with that. Like I said, I try to stick to Japanese stuff, but it was kind of fun going off the rails on that one. So yes, indeed. Shibas can't make up its mind. Well, they try, but they're not sure how much authority that they have, and there's good reasons for this as well. I go back and forth on this myself. Sergeant Bilko, excellent to see you. Atomic Tom, hello, good to see you as well. Looks like everyone's rocking in, so you know what, I think I'm just going to dive into it, because it always ends up that we get to the top of the hour and I've only covered like 2 topics. Good news is that they're all pretty much the same topic tonight. It'll be hard to edit, but let's just see if I can pile through it. Let's get it started. First one, this actually was something that they were considering at the start of the week, and I think they're pretty close to actually approving, is allowing dentists in Japan to administer the COVID-19 vaccines. Of course, there is now a pretty clear problem, which is a thing. There are a number of stories on this, which I will go through as we cover these, but the main problem right now is, of course, the first issue for Japan, of course, is supply. They don't make the Pfizer vaccine here, and even the Moderna one, which I think is on the brink of being approved. They were planning to manufacture the AstraZeneca one. I think Takeda had the rights to manufacture that, but everyone's looking at the fuss in Europe over that and the sort of issues that it's having. And this was something that when Suga was over in America and didn't eat Biden's hamburger, he did secure some extra viruses. That was some extra viruses. He secured some extra vaccines. The last thing we need is more viruses, of course. Interesting situation in America, by the way, that America conversely has more vaccines than it needs now, and now it's actually all the people who want to get vaccines there it seems like have got it. And now the problem is that half of the country that doesn't want the vaccine isn't getting it, and now they're starting to ask people to get it, and people aren't getting it. So, and of course, people are afraid of setting up some sort of 5G connection to the baby Jesus or something. I don't know what they're afraid of exactly, but some sort of perfectly rational alternative to science that should be included in education, just basically witches and flying around on broomsticks and stuff like that, which apparently a lot of people in America seem to believe in nowadays. And the result is that you have countries, and I'm not talking about Japan, by the way. Japan, can hold on for a while, but there are countries obviously in dire need of more vaccines. Interesting stat though as well, for all the stuff that's happening in India, apparently India is manufacturing the most vaccines of any country in the world. Of course you would need to when you've got 1.3 billion people, I think it is. But bonus virus, that was a mistake, Atomic Tom. But yes indeed, I like that emoji, by the way. That should totally be allowed. So you've got all of that. In Japan you have this problem that there is still insufficient supply, but there is sufficient supply for what they have planned, which is rolling out to all it turns out now 4.8 million medical workers, and what is the number, something like 36 million people over 65, not over 35. So they are rolling those out, and what they're finding is that they're doing it at little clinics. There's 2 big problems with the rollout happening right now. First thing is that the government has pretty much, and this is really the Ministry of Health that they've done this again. They were responsible for securing the vaccines, and they thought rather than make sure that everyone actually gets the shots, they would just make sure it all got delivered to the local governments in boxes. And that basically they would leave it up to the local governments to figure out how to get everybody injected. Although there are still laws in Japan that apparently only registered doctors or nurses acting under the supervision of a doctor can administer vaccines. So this is actually at my work when we all get the flu shots every year. They're all administered by nurses, but there's like some doctor there. You all get in a big line, and there's a doctor sort of watching and certifying everything. But this is the thing, whereas other countries, when they wanted to do these sort of mass vaccination drives, and they basically allowed anybody, practically car mechanics, to vaccinate people. But, they would allow, people, paramedics, nurses, midwives, so they let everyone do it. Whereas in Japan, it still is very much locked down to doctors. And of course, many parts of Japan just don't have many doctors per population. So they've sent it out to all of these really underpopulated areas that hardly have any doctors, that can't really distribute it. And in Tokyo and the big cities, they've hardly distributed any vaccines at all. And plus, there are so many doctors that are not yet vaccinated that they can't start the rollout because they don't have the medical workers themselves are not yet protected. So you're trying to figure out how to break the bottleneck on now getting everybody shot up with the vaccines. The government's decided to allow dentists, who, of course, dentists will administer anesthesia, and you get needles from dentists. So apparently they're allowing they're considering, or in fact, I think they just passed this week, an exception to allow dentists to give the shots, which is great for me. I live in a neighborhood with like a bazillion dentists. The only thing is, dentists are an interesting proposition in Japan. On the one hand, I mean, in New Zealand, dentistry school is actually harder to get into in terms of like exam scores than medical school. At least it was back in my day. And I do remember having braces, and you could always tell the dental clinics from the normal GP clinics, because the dental clinics always had Mercedes Benzes or BMWs parked out in front belonging to the people who ran them. They were better paid. People care a little bit more about their teeth, I suppose. In Japan, it's not a well-paid sort of a profession. It's cheap, and this is great. I mean, my Japanese friends, when they needed to get crowns done, they would actually fly back to Japan, and it would be cheaper to get on a flight back to Japan and get it done in Japan than it was to get it done in New Zealand. So on the one hand, they are more affordable. And my homestay in Fukuoka was a dentist, and they are artisanal, right? They're very good at what they don't use as great technology because there isn't as much money for it, but they're very good at what they do generally. The problem is, of course, that because the going rate for dentists in Japan is so cheap. Frankly, a lot of them use what comes across to me as, I don't think I've ever found one other than my own homestay that I thought wasn't really, honestly, like a scam. Unfortunately, the model here is if you go for like a cleaning, if you feel like, you need to get a checkup and get your teeth all cleaned up once a year, which I like to do, they'll actually only do like a quarter of your mouth at a time. You'll go in there for a clean and they'll say, sure, we'll give you a clean. And they clean like, a quarter at the top, right-hand side of your mouth. And then they'll say that they need to book you in for the other appointments. And it'll grab what you expect to be one appointment, rapidly turns into not only the 4 appointments to clean your mouth, but also the other follow-up appointments that for any sort of filling, for example, they'll do this as well. They'll spend a whole session just drilling a hole in the filling and then leaving it there and saying you have to come back if you want to get it filled in. And they'll drill holes basically so that you have to go back. And these things easily turn into like 10 times, and most people I know just give up because you can only schedule these during the week, during working hours. You have to take time off work for every single visit. It's just impossible to do. And just out of frustration, I've actually given up with my mouth like 3/4 cleaned sometimes. And even the last visit I went to, they started drilling holes in fillings and stuff like that. And I said, fill them in now. I'm not leaving unless you fill it in. And, we'll talk about the rest later. And I didn't go back. So just from that, I did tweet out that there was, I worry if they're going to allow dentists to administer vaccines, they're going to find some way, instead of like 2 visits, they're going to make you come back for like 20 visits or something like that. They're only going to give you a little bit at a time, or they're going to rub on the alcohol and say, come back tomorrow and we'll give you half of the shot or something like that. That unfortunately seems to be the business model. That said, there are more of them, and provided they can get them distributed, that is a thing. There's actually been a big kind of a ruckus in Parliament and a lot of dissatisfaction where the government's been so focused on that they've secured the supply and they completely kind of washed their hands of responsibility for the distribution. In fact, Taro Kono Taro, he likes to be called Kono Taro, so I like to call him Taro Kono Taro just to catch all the directions. He actually tweeted this week that yes, we've secured all the vaccines necessary for the planned rollouts. So we really need the prefectures and the municipalities to actually get moving and try a little bit harder to actually get things done so it gets distributed. I.e., we've done our job, but the rest of you all really suck, is what the minister in charge of the distribution of vaccines tweeted out. In Parliament as well, there was an opposition member actually took the Prime Minister to task and said, hey, look, Biden in America, he came up with targets, even general targets for when population would get actually vaccinated. Do you have targets for when, not the supply, we all know what the supply is, do you have targets for when the vaccination runs are going to be complete, because we're hearing radically different dates? And basically there's this a very well edited video by an opposition member showing this thing where he asks like 4 or 5 times the same question. Every time the Prime Minister says, it's not easy. We're going to do our best. We have secured enough supply. That's all that he would say back. So this is the problem right now. There is this bottleneck around distribution. It's kind of frustrating here. Japan does have a very low rollout, I think, compared to other countries. It's, I believe, only ahead of maybe South Korea in terms of the OECD. It's like 1.8%. In fact, maybe only ahead of New Zealand. But New Zealand will catch it up in no time. It's only got 5 million people. And they've got no cases, so why hurry? I must admit, I really want this sort of done, especially as we go into the situation today with a new state of emergency. But unfortunately, without vaccinations, it's not going to happen. So we'll see. But anyway, that is good news that they're going to allow more people to give the shots. Into the comments. Boom. I saw a lot of people commenting there. In fact, I think I saw something from Dan H right as I kicked off. So let's see what that is. Have I heard any updates on Trans-Siberian Railway connection to Tokyo? Also, welcome for last week. Yes, thank you for that, Dan H. No. And you know what? I was actually I remember when I was just turned 20 years old and I went on the big overseas trip, the world trip. And for me, one of the highlights was flying from Tokyo to Frankfurt. I got to fly over the steppe, the sort of Siberia sort of route. My face was pressed against the airplane the whole way. The idea of being able to catch a train across there is sort of amazing. A lot of these projects, there's not just the idea of the Trans-Siberian Railway coming across to Japan. The bigger plan, which kind of still makes a lot of sense, would be for there to be a pipeline from Siberia to Japan that would go down through the Kamchatka Peninsula and possibly Sakhalin and connect to Hokkaido, even through the northeast territories, the southern Kuril Islands that Japan considers to be occupied by Russia. Probably not that. They go from Sakhalin. Sakhalin actually has a ton of oil. And as much as that talk was always about it being an oil pipeline or even a natural gas pipeline, you know what? A hydrogen pipeline would make a lot of sense right now. And you can actually, countries like Russia would be able to extract it from methane. So this is where the dividend of Japan and Russia ending World War II, there's a lot of positives to it. The downside is that you got to deal with Russia. And, Russia's been a bit of a black pit for overseas development funds. And again, I think the Far East of Russia has always been really, really keen to have trade ties open with Japan because, there's obviously huge potential for development of the Russian Far East. And for Japan, for its energy needs and whatever, there's a mutual huge opportunity. But, the territorial question about the Southern Kurils, without that being adequately answered. And the whole thing about that is that, Russia agreed to give 2 of the islands back and to negotiate later about the other 2 back in 1956 under Brezhnev. But then he died. And Russia being Russia, the deal no longer existed, which is kind of a shame. A complicated issue. The islands were inhabited before the Russian occupation, and they are inhabited after the Russian occupation. These are not rocks like the Senkaku Islands or the Takeshima. These actually have people on them. There's actually a huge community of, displaced refugees from the islands still living in Hokkaido that still periodically the Russians give permission to go back and see their family graves. So, it's actually an issue that involves people, unlike some of the other territorial disputes. It's a complicated one, and from my perspective, Putin obviously has the opposition, extremely aggressively under control. So why wouldn't it be a big deal to give up a couple of islands? But obviously, under Putin, the doctrine is only growing territory, and they've been doing that. South Ossetia, Eastern Ukraine, Crimea, all that sort of thing. So giving, it might seem a little, maybe he doesn't want to give them back. It's a shame. I would love for there to be a pipeline, provided it's hydrogen, not natural gas. And I would love for there to be a railway. I would ride that railway. That would be awesome to be able to travel across Siberia to actually go. Hell, you could go to London, couldn't you? One of the things I've always wanted to do is a Trans-Siberian Railway, but no, there's been no progress on it. It's one of those carrots that gets held out on these talks whenever we talk with the Russians, but essentially the Russians can't climb down from their nationalist position about not compromising on any Russian territory, and that Japan has to accept the reality of the end of World War II and that it lost, and Japan not being able to give it up because the refugees are a big voting lobby. So yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to that question, but I hope you found that satisfactory, Dan H. Tokyo 503, Razo, good to see you all. Kustos, good to have Kustos or Kustos, I don't know how to pronounce that, but good to have you in here all the same. I'm just going to go and see if I can pick up anyone shouting me out, and I will stop. But Steve from Berkeley, better late than never indeed. Good to have you in here. Oh, it just jumped ahead there. I see that there was a comment at me there from Believe in Yourself. Good evening. Good to see you. And Nesta125. Hey, good to see you, Nesta. And thank you again for hosting Among Us last night. That was fun. And boom, let's get back into the next topic, because it really does look like Quint Ranted. I think I've seen those videos. Like, you can see sped up versions and slow versions of the Trans-Siberian Railway. But yeah, I would love to do that. An enormous squirrel. Indeed, I think that's what the Trans-Siberian Railway is. It's essentially a large Russian squirrel. So yes, let's move on to topic 2. I really seriously am only going to get through 2 topics before 11 o'clock, and then I'm going to have to do the last 40 topics in the last 20 minutes, as always happens. Let's just keep pushing on. Toyota, oh, what a feeling. Toyota has, interestingly, they're one of the car companies which is, of course, getting made by Tesla to look like a dinosaur at the moment and kind of in danger. And it's kind of ironic because, here's the thing with Japan. Japan has a lot of engineers that are good at producing patentable IP, and they patent a lot. And it's funny, of car and, sort of a battery patents, Toyota actually has the most patents of any company in the world. It's just that they, for whatever reason, have decided not to use them. And they've been open about the reasons that they haven't used them. Which is pretty much that they are now beholden to these enormous supply networks of every car engine component, that, to break off those components, to actually rejig their supply chains to be able to go to a Tesla type, iPhone with wheels, would actually, to break off those existing supply contracts and everything would take, beyond probably like 10 years to be able to convert. And so it's not so much a technology problem for Toyota about the ability to do it, although that is part of the problem. But the bigger problem is that they are just part of a sort of overladen supply chain where, Tesla's just gone from the ground up with a very simplified. I mean, this is the thing about electric cars. They have far fewer engine and far fewer components to make. To me, Teslas are, I would just the ludicrous mode thing, just for that alone, I am interested. Apparently they do need servicing. Apparently they're not great quality, and that's what Toyota really sells. But this is what people kind of want, a Tesla performance in the quality of a Toyota. And the good news is that if that's what you want, Toyota is promising to release 15 electric models. It's not clear exactly what they're going to be yet, or what kind of platform they're going to use, or how electric they're going to be, or how much range they're going to have, or what the performance is going to be like. And no doubt they're going to actually probably look a lot more familiar like current hybrid and current cars. It is good, I suppose, that they've realized the urgency of switching over. I mean, the fact that Tesla's market cap actually recently, I think, exceeded Toyota's, which is just crazy in the time that they've done it. I love the fact that I don't know, does Tesla's money, does that go over to SpaceX, or I guess it does via Elon Musk's pockets? But what SpaceX is doing is super cool, and I think from that perspective, that to me is another reason to buy a Tesla. But at the same time, I would really love to see Japanese engineers who are good at this stuff, show their hand and actually get into this. So if they're saying that they're going to release 15 electric vehicle models by 2025, I really want to see what those cars are. And I guess if 2025 isn't far away, so we're probably going to start to see the concepts and prototypes of those in the next year or two. But there again, I mean, given how fast some other manufacturers, particularly like Volvo and even General Motors and some others, Honda, are already moving, Nissan, of course, even 2025 seems pretty late at this point, although it's light speed from a Toyota perspective. I think they realize that their business is in trouble. But one thing to note, it's going to be massively disruptive for not only just Toyota as a company, but for Aichi Prefecture. That whole prefecture, half of that prefecture is either Toyota or businesses that supply Toyota. And in order to switch to electric cars, they're going to have to get a lot of those companies to either retool. I mean, even getting them all to retool, this is the whole thing. Electric cars just don't have as many components, so they can't all convert over to something else. It's going to be really disruptive for the economy of Aichi around Toyota. But at the same time, I really want to see some really cool high-tech Japanese cars, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I've heard a lot that there are a lot of parallels with smartphones, just in terms of the lithium battery being key, in terms of the components and so on. It's why a lot of phone manufacturers are looking at making the cars. Interesting to note there that although Japan actually had smartphone smartphones way ahead of, even the iPhone, at least at launch. Japan was way ahead of everywhere in terms of smartphones. When the iPhone model, when that came out and everyone started trying to copy that, it just didn't work. And I tried. I invested in some Toshiba laptops and so on, and they were all pieces of crap. So as much faith as I have in Japanese engineers, I've also seen them screw up at this kind of technology conversion. So we'll have to see. But I am very glad to see that they are committing at least to making more of those things, and I'd like to see what they are. Next topic. Boom. You might recall the other a wee while ago. This is why they don't allow the Ministry of Health to be in charge of the pandemic. It would seem logical, but pretty much after the Diamond Princess and the mishandling of that, the government decided to put, and again, it seemed kind of backwards to put the Ministry of Economic Development in charge of the pandemic instead. But basically, they're trying to figure out how to make sure that the Ministry of Health just does as little as possible. And it's apparently it's considered within the government one of the less reputable ministries. It's just they're just associated with a lot of scandals and incompetence. And here's another case. This is actually, there was a after the Ministry of Health itself was issuing directives to people not to go out drinking late at night, not to have parties. It was actually the party was actually from, was it here? I believe it was actually it was like a New Year's party, a farewell party that was held actually by members of the disease tracking division, that they had this party and it turned into a cluster where 27 people got COVID-19, which is actually doing, and it was at a nightclub at Ginza, exactly what they've been condemning everybody else for doing, and they actually did it. Just kind of comedic in a bad way that the Japanese Ministry of Health, they are the ones actually. This is exactly the sort of thing which has led to us having a state of emergency, and the people who are supposed to be telling us not to do this sort of thing are doing this sort of thing. So it was a kind of a farewell party, I suppose, in terms of their credibility. That's how that one worked out. Good to see some more people in the chat. I see that we have Sadiq. Good to see you, Sadiq. Hakan Guris, good to have you with us. Dean Bennett, howdy people indeed. Love to see you all coming in. Fisker, I remember them, and I think they've actually started to come out super expensive but kind of fancy 500 mile range car or something like that. But yeah. So anyway, I mentioned earlier about the distribution of vaccines and how that came out a bit weird. In Tokyo, case in point, this is a map of Tokyo. Those numbers represent the number of boxes. Now, I actually did the math on this the other day. I was a little bit wrong with the caption on this, by the way. I said that didn't ask for it, and I had misunderstood that. Apparently what had happened was the Ministry of Health, the same Ministry of Health as here, asked every municipality in Japan, and by the way, this is not done at a prefecture level. This is not done by Tokyo Prefecture. This is actually done by the local city councils. So within Tokyo, there are 23 significant city councils as well as, other cities, but this is the 23 wards of Tokyo. So they asked them all, without any sort of guidance, how many doses do you think you're going to need for the elderly rollout? And some, apparently there was no guidance on how they were supposed to fill this out. So, how many boxes would you like? And each box contains something like, I believe it was something like 200 vials, and every vial, depending on what type of syringe you're using, either it's 5 doses or 6 doses. They've only had the 5-dose syringes until now, but next month they're going to have 6-dose syringes for everybody. So that will increase the number of shots available in every box. Basically, every box represents around, I believe, on the current syringes, it's like 900 shots, and it's like 1,100 shots with the new syringes. So, it's not a lot, and there are going to be future supply sort of drops. But apparently when they asked each one of the wards, at first I thought they hadn't responded. That was incorrect. They had responded to the survey. However, some of them, like Shinagawa there and Minato-ku and, the fancy places, many of them responded, hey, yeah, well, for the first 2 weeks, I think we'll need 3 boxes, please. Katsushika-ku, it's kind of interesting, the less economically well-off parts of Tokyo over here, you can see 47, 38, Adachi 24, they said, we would like all the boxes, please. So, apparently this became a big thing on TV, that people were assuming that, if you had wards with similar populations of elderly people, like, Minato ward, or Toshima with Ikebukuro. You come up here. Toshima had the lowest number of boxes, where they actually, assumed that they didn't know what sort of criteria, what sort of basis to make their estimates based upon. So they did it based on a 2-week forecast, whereas, Katsushika and Edogawa and Adachi made their estimates based on the end of all time. When they gave all these radically different things, apparently in Toshima they expected, well, the Ministry of Health, of course, they all have common sense. So they're going to balance it out reasonably to make sure everybody gets a reasonably even spread and there won't be too much of a radical difference. And apparently not. 15 times difference between what Toshima-ku, which Ikebukuro has, and nearby Katsushika-ku. They were expecting common sense, but of course that is from the same ministry that had 27 staffers have a party in Ginza and catch coronavirus. So, maybe expecting a little bit too much. Perhaps they've learned their lessons, I'm sure. But yes, they pointed out there's no objective, and they've said, hey, Ministry of Health, why don't you give us actual objective guidelines on this? As well as, why not actually, rather than just make it a lolly scramble for boxes of vaccines, why not actually think about where actually needs them in terms of population, in terms of current cases, and distribute them that way? But apparently for now, they took people literally. Apparently, by the way, Katsushika actually asked for like 53. And that was too much even for the Ministry of Health, so they only gave them 47. But when Ikebukuro said they needed like 3, they were like, oh, cool. We didn't realize there were so few people there. They probably didn't even think that much into it. So that's been a problem. And indeed, Quintrag, they should have asked what the elderly population was. Bear in mind, this is not the total number of vaccines. There will be future boxes, and they were asking based on their readiness to distribute. But here's the thing: nobody's ready to distribute. These vaccines in Edogawa and Katsushika, they're not, the numbers of vaccinations every day have not gone up based on the delivery of these boxes. They're all being kept in freezers, and most of them have not even figured out yet how they are going to distribute the vaccines. They're just sitting there. They're just making sure that they have enough. Again, it should have been, I agree, it should have been distributed just based on the population. And frankly, the government should be doing a lot more in terms of guidance to help with distribution efforts. And right now, they've just completely abdicated responsibility for that. Well, that's what happens. So, yeah, that's what's going on with that. Moving on, butter. Thank you, Sergeant Bilko. I'm not so triggered. We've had a steady butter supply lately. I've actually been pretty good. But before I chase that squirrel, I'm going to get back into the story here. Sainted Sir, good to see you. Was distracted next to the vegetables. I don't know what you're talking about. I probably missed a chain of conversation there that was very important for context, Mr. Cordychet. But good to see you, Sainted Sir, and hi to everybody again. And remember, do what Sainted Sir did. Say hello if you're just joining. It's nice to be able to catch all the people as you come in. AV84K, good to see you indeed. Glad that you made it. Tuned in a bit late, hey, but I'm piling through here today, so we'll see how far we get. Interesting. Just an update. There was another case. I mean, I really don't want to dedicate too much energy to this in a way. But yeah, there was another comfort woman case this week in South Korea, where again went to the in fact, was this the Seoul District Court, not the Supreme Court of Korea, but apparently the same court a few months ago had comfort women go and say that in spite of the war reparations paid to Japan for all loss and harm caused by the occupation and the war and the colonization of Korea in 1965, which was kept secret from the Korean population, but the Korean government agreed that they would take responsibility for the distribution of reparations without telling their population that they had agreed to that. And the government just shut down all attempts at suing Japan over the years. In recent years, the reality of that pact has come out, but in spite of that, and in the subsequent, in spite of having that, 3 different attempts to actually apologize and compensate and resolve the comfort women issue that were agreed each time between Japan and South Korea, and for political reasons, those getting tossed out every time after they had been agreed. The problem throughout remains. The problem is that the comfort women themselves are entitled to compensation. They're entitled to pensions and compensation and protection. However, the South Korean government spent all the money Japan gave it on building roads and infrastructure for their own economic miracle. And you could say overall that it was worth it. The Korean economy has done amazingly since the end of the Korean War, in no small part due to the Japanese aid that was contributed. But the comfort women and the victims of Japan have been out of touch. And when whenever they've complained about it to the Korean government said, yeah, those Japanese, they really screwed you over, didn't they? And that's like a national, like political rally call for left and right, particularly the left in South Korea. So you've ended up with a situation where you have these impoverished, comfort women who are frankly entitled to compensation. And Japan has tried, to give compensation and has apologized multiple times. But, it's not just the compensation that they need. They want satisfaction. They want a sense that Japan has actually acknowledged their suffering and apologized for it. And they've gone to the courts a number of times, or their organizations have supported going through the courts. And while the courts, pretty much since 1965, have consistently shut down these efforts, lately the politics got so bad over there in a way, or at least became so anti-Japanese that in two cases, one involving comfort women and another case involving forced labor, conscripted labor, of which there was in Japan as well, but obviously, Korea was under Japanese colonization and occupation during World War II, and they were not paid for. Basically people were rounded up and sent to Japan to work in factories, and they weren't paid for it. And so, and many of the companies that received the benefit of that wartime labor from Korean laborers still exist today. So, yeah, they went and successfully, in spite of the reparations treaty between Japan and Korea, settling all legal claims relating to the colonial period. Basically the Korean courts found, particularly under Moon Jae-in, the current president, who sort of said that no, we're not going to honor any previous deals with Japan, and we're going to consider everything open, and Japan's going to pay its proper respect and so on. And this is what's torpedoed the relationship from the Japan side perspective. The courts took the signal and they started saying that it's against public policy to not award damages against Japanese companies and to seize assets of Japanese companies to pay additional compensation, not to the government of Korea, but to the direct victims, that they're entitled to direct recompense. And they found this both with the comfort women and with the war laborers, which has caused the Japanese government to say, well, we can't do business in South Korea if you're going to go and seize our assets, even though we both agreed that you wouldn't do this. So it's basically destroyed relations between South Korea and Japan. They're actually probably the worst that they've ever actually been since 1965, since relations were established. And in the middle of that, there's been a number of these court cases which have just sort of backed that up. And the government there has said, hey, the courts have said it. There's nothing that we can do about it. And apparently this is the thing. This is, in the same way as it's an enormous political issue within Korea about how to deal with these, because nobody wants to be seen as going against the comfort woman. At the same time, everyone wants to blame Japan for it, and it's the same conflict within the courts. So why am I saying all of this? Because there was a court case this week where the court actually, for the first time in a number of years, said, well, yeah, this is actually a state-to-state issue that Japan has actually resolved directly with South Korea, and people can't bring individual claims against Japan. Comfort women cannot bring individual claims against Japan because this is resolved state-to-state. They don't have a basis for bringing a case. Which is interesting because the same court just a few months ago found the opposite. They found that comfort women could bring claims against Japan, and this is again why Japan has been shutting down its links with South Korea. Looks bad from the Japan perspective to be saying that it looks like they're saying screw the comfort women, which is kind of what it is. But at the same time, the South Korean side sort of is egging them on, like they're not responsible at all for settling up based on the fact that they've received the compensation, and the fact that they agreed, government to government, a deal to compensate and apologize to the comfort women, which the new government decided, well, that was the last government. There's been an election, so we're going to toss out the international agreement with Japan. Which just shows Japan that they can't trust governments there, and they can't do any sort of deal done in good faith. To actually pay compensation is going to get tossed out, so why bother? And the thing is, while all of this goes on, the comfort women are now basically they're all in their 90s now, or older. They're basically dying out, and without any compensation or the apologies that they want. They've received different sorts of, they've been entitled to receive compensation and apologies, but many have held out for this because they've been led on by political leaders and activists to thinking that they can get it, and they're ultimately going to be screwed over, and they've been manipulated. By everybody. I'd say Japan has some guilt in this as well, but I'd also say that the organizations there that have used them for political gain have left them destitute. And in the end of the day, they deserve compensation, and they're being screwed over by people trying to use them to score points, which is the biggest tragedy of the whole thing. And this is why, again, I've just become totally resigned when it comes to relations with South Korea. This is kind of a sign that the courts realize that, their rulings are more than just a protest statement against Japan. They can actually screw up the economy and relations with Japan entirely, which is what they've done. And the court seems to have recognized that, and they've come back to a more conventional, although probably less politically popular, decision this week. But there's still the question about, well, what about the other case that they found a few months ago? So from Japan's perspective, and I've been in Japan for too long, so I kind of see it this way as well. Even with this court case, which looks like Korea coming around to a sort of a common sense, baseline for having a normal relationship again, they still have a lot to sort out over there. And unfortunately, I don't, in spite of this being kind of a positive step for Japan re-engaging and becoming friendly with South Korea again, which I would love, I don't think it's enough. I think Korea has to sort out itself what it wants from Japan, and what sort of a basis it can work with Japan. And look, if South Korea wants isolation from Japan appears cool with that, or at least resigned to that. I do think Japan's tried in good faith to resolve this issue multiple times. They have. But look, at the same time, Korea is not obligated to accept any apology that Japan gives. They're entitled to remain angry and isolated forever if that's what they want to do, but they need to make up their minds, And in the end of the day, the tragedy is that the real victims here who actually deserve to be compensated are the ones who it looks like are not going to get it, and that's a shame. So it's an interesting case, but unfortunately I don't think that South Korea-Japan relations can be fixed, actually. It's funny seeing with the new Biden administration some articles saying that America needs to fix relations between South Korea and Japan. And I always sarcastically say, well, this is like, offering to, marriage counsel between Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. You just shouldn't go there sometimes. I admire the optimism, but anyway, I mean, it's an interesting court case, but I don't see it getting resolved easily soon. Back into the comments, Sachifu. Good to see you, Sachifu, and other people. Have I missed anyone else? No. I'm going to cheese dip. Shubis, it's early in the morning for cheese dip for you, but cheese dip away. Yes, those are also dairy products, which you can't have in Japan because of the agricultural distribution system here, which I will not go into. Watami. I think I mentioned Watami. You may remember I talked about Watami a wee while ago. Watami is the only izakaya in Japan that I will not go into on moral principle. It's a popular chain. It is a widespread chain. It's one of the biggest chains of izakaya, Japanese style pubs, you'd say, but they're actual like restaurants. You sort of go into them, you sit down, but you go there primarily to drink and eat snacks with them. And this guy, he figured out a good sort of a business model for for quite good food, good atmosphere, good drinks, good service, quite affordable. Repeated the chain all over the country and became rich. Turned out that he achieved this by treating all of his employees like slaves, not paying them and working them to death. And the result was excellent service and cheap food. But when people started dying, and the president of the company, the CEO of the company, started tweeting that some people just couldn't hack it, and they were basically just very unsympathetic things. Even cases where employees had clearly worked to death, 4 days and sort of been abused and so on, and the company just came back and said, no, they're just exaggerating. It must have been something else. Totally just unsympathetic and horrible. And so basically the personification of an evil boss by Japanese working people to death standards, like work them to death and not even sorry about it, and please come and enjoy our cheaper than average cheese balls at 3 o'clock in the morning. This company just became like the symbol of the very worst conditions of the restaurant industry. And it was at that time that the Liberal Democrat Party of Japan thought, you know what, here's a person we should put really high up on our party list for the next election. And I've mentioned before how Japan, the LDP could fix the gender representation problem on the LDP party list tomorrow if they wanted to, just by deciding that they would stack the first 10 or 15 positions on their party list for the PR vote. In Japan, it's proportional representation. So in addition to direct local representatives that you elect, like in America, you also get to vote for party, and they'll fill in, they'll make sure that the overall balance of the seats in the parliament are based, they'll adjust the balances to make sure that those match the party vote representation levels based on the party lists, which is just a list of names, 1 through whatever 100. And they decided to put Watami, basically the Dr. Mengele of the restaurant industry, at like near the top of the party list. So he didn't actually have to run for a seat. He didn't get elected anywhere. It's just for the people who just put a vote in the LDP column, put him in by default. So instead of, all the other things they could have done with the list, they put a slave they put a slave driver into Parliament. And in Parliament, well, he's been busy, and congratulations, he's actually figured out how to give himself a $90 million aid to support his own business in a special trial to see different ways of supporting business through the pandemic. The government's decided to give Watami a I could actually log into this, but I think it's at the top here anyway. The Development Bank of Japan is, it's promising it's going to change its business model, hopefully to not killing its employees anymore. And they're actually going to experiment with this to see, to help them through the pandemic and so on, by promising to adjust their business model with a $90 million loan. So it's good to be in Parliament, it seems. Kind of crazy of all the companies that got this, that they gave it to a company that's actually considered a black, like a company that actually abuses its workers, and whose kind of inverse celebrity company president is frankly a person who just got into Parliament by default, and he's got himself a $90 million loan. It's kind of crazy. So, Hey, Watami, and that's right, guys, English world. I mean, just bear in mind that those, salty snacks are from the tears of the employees. But, they taste good, and it's cheap and it's affordable. I've always been a Caesarea person myself. Not quite as classy as Watami, but, it's all microwave there, but still pretty good for what it is. Could be a psychopath, believe in yourself. Well, that's kind of the profile that people have. But anyway. Very, 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 very Trumpian anyway, to just sort of double down on the badness. The next story is, so this is about the distribution. In fact, I think I've already, let me just check okay, this is more about the distribution of the vaccine, so I just talked about that. I'll skip past that. This is good. There's a YouTube channel called Kento Bento. And I think on Twitter it's Kento Bento 2015 for whatever reason, but Kento Bento, they basically do animated history stories, not just about Japan. They do some about famous like bank heists and crimes or whatever. They did a good one about how the North Korean spies operate out of Macau. Some other good sort of stories, but the most recent episode of Kento Bento is the first of a 3-part episode on the hijacking of Japan Airlines 351. To me, this time period, the early 1970s, the late 1960s, is just like a crazy time. It's so impossible for me to imagine Japan, a country where you have high school students and university students not only being political and non-apathetic, but being so political and non-apathetic that they are actually doing Capitol Hill riots in Parliament and blowing up, buildings and hijacking airplanes. And the general story, I mean, if you don't know about this, perhaps I shouldn't give spoilers, because it is an incredible story. As airplane hijackings go, what I already knew about this, particularly basically some Red Army terrorists, basically university students, some even younger. There were actually some high school students in this group, decided to hijack an airplane to take to Cuba. They wanted to redirect a domestic flight to Fukuoka to Cuba. It turned out they didn't realize that the plane couldn't fly to Cuba. So they decided instead to go towards Pyongyang, and this was with a full plane of people who were flying from Tokyo to, from Haneda to Fukuoka, I believe. And it turned into this crazy extended sort of ordeal. And without going into it, even the first episode of it, I've heard the story told. I've seen documentaries on this. I've heard the story told many ways. The way that Kento Bento did it, apart from the fact that the storytelling is awesome, they focused in on some details that I didn't actually appreciate, like the identities and the backgrounds of some of the hijackers, the nuances of some of the, the interactions with the pilot and so on, and how the plane was taken over. But yeah, basically this is a bunch of students hijacked a domestic flight with samurai swords, and were kind of successful. It's a crazy story, just on its own. It's a story that, someone's talking about that, I want to listen to it. But the story was told in a really, really captivating sort of a way. It's going to be a 3-parter, and there's only 1 part up so far, but I really do recommend go subscribe, go check out Kento Bento, and go check out the just check it out, Insane Hijacking of Japan Airlines Flight 351. It's a well told story, and the next 2 episodes will be good to look out to. So yeah, moving on. That's me. I was going through some social media cleaning up, and let me if I get closer to the camera, take this off. So yeah, in 1994, I think 1994, when I got my student ID, so I was like 18 years old at that time. That's if I time traveled, I'd probably want to go back again. But that's what I looked like. And I came across that and found it was kind of funny. Not that different, a little bit depressing. To see yourself at 18, half my age now, but more than half my age. Or less than half my age, I suppose is the way you should say it. I did have hair once. And actually after that, when I was at university, I found when I look like that, I seem to attract like Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists and Christians. And when I was like... when I grew my hair long and I grew out a long goatee, they stopped hassling me. So I went through a number of looks at university, and I didn't take a lot of photos at that time. But yes, I thought that was funny, finding my old ID photo, and so I thought I'd share that. So yeah, that was me. The Asahi Shimbun, they came out this week with a pretty directly worded, editorial saying, okay, enough already. We do realize that not only will athletes and Olympic participants be putting their lives in danger coming to Japan for the Olympics in July. I mean, that's absolutely clear. It's absolutely clear that Tokyo will not be anywhere near vaccinated, that COVID will still be out of control, and it'll be dangerous both for, and will just statistically, whether it's one person, whether it's 5 people, whether it's 50 people, given the numbers of people coming to the Olympics, and the impossibility of adequately quarantining or controlling the behavior of the athletes and the teams that are coming here, as well as the general population, it's absolutely clear it's going to result in more cases, and more cases is absolutely clearly going to result in more deaths. And it seems at the moment nobody wants to make the call. The rumor is that the Japanese government doesn't want to make the call because the IOC will then claim compensation, and they're afraid of having to spend extra money on this. So they're waiting for the IOC to make the call. And the IOC is making the call because is waiting because they want the Japanese government to make the call so that they can get paid out. So the result is no one's making the call, and it's basically between people who are in it only for the money, not for the actual public health thing, and they're both creating a situation that is unquestionably going to result in athletes and residents of Tokyo getting sick, and some of them are going to die. And Asahi's pointing out the idea of there being an adequate, there being a tolerable death toll to hosting the Olympics from disease is kind of ridiculous, which it is. And again, if the population here was going to be vaccinated, if it was possible to actually isolate the village and so on, and I could see it being possible maybe 6 months after if they did a crazy vaccination campaign or something like that, but that's not what the situation is going to be, and it's 100% clear. And as it is, if it goes ahead, it is going to be impossible for it not to result in the deaths of athletes and the deaths of additional deaths above what would happen otherwise of people in Tokyo and other hosting areas. So yeah, Asahi's saying this is BS. Somebody has to call uncle on this. Right now, they're just playing chicken over money. And nobody involved in this is from a medical or a public health perspective. Nobody in making the decision about to pull the cancellation is representative of a public health perspective or an athlete health perspective. So yeah, they're saying the correct thing here, Asahi Shimbun. So I agree. It's unfortunately, I mean, someone has to say it. Tokyo is not ready to host the Olympics. They can host the Olympics. We have we have the facilities and everything. They could host them in front of no participant, in front of no spectators. But fact is, it's going to result in extra people getting sick, which means extra people are going to die. And the idea that makes any sense at any time is ridiculous. So yeah, I again speaking truth, unfortunately. And to add to everything, of course, from today we have a new state of emergency, which was declared today for Tokyo and surrounding prefectures, I believe, as well as Osaka. In fact, it might just be Tokyo, actually, but also Hyogo Prefecture, Okinawa Prefecture, and Osaka Prefecture. Have I got that right? Was that for Okinawa as well? But again, part of it looks like a kind of a Hail Mary to try to get the numbers down to make Tokyo look safe, which certainly is part of it. But if that's, I mean, it shouldn't just be for the Olympics. They should be doing that anyway. But the focus of the new state of emergency, that's a story. We'll come back to that. Let me see if I can find something with a focus on the actual Nobu's lockdown. So basically in fact, did I save it? Oh man, I've still got so many stories. This is it. So here's a list of all the places which are going to be closed down. So the story is going to be for the state of emergency in Tokyo. Essentially, what they've come to the conclusion, based on contact tracing and data that they have, is that essentially alcohol is seen as the main culprit, where the main events of traceable clusters where many people have caught COVID-19 in Tokyo have been events accompanied by alcohol, either parties, farewell parties at Ginza clubs, or even just sort of hanging out. But wherever there have been traceable clusters, they've often been accompanied with alcohol-related get-togethers. So the government sort of has said all restaurants or all bars and places that serve alcohol will need to close. If you stop serving alcohol, you can remain open, but you have to close by 8 p.m. So they're sort of cracking down basically on alcohol. And they're also talking about how a lot of students have been buying alcohol from, particularly with all the bars closing at 8 o'clock, they've been buying alcohol from convenience stores and just drinking on the streets. Funny seeing people crouching like Tochigi Yankees talking about, I'm going to get drunk. And sort of basically creating like a sort of moral panic atmosphere that the government's decided and NHK is fully cooperating with and cracking down, that the scourge that must be addressed. It's almost like they're not interested in the COVID-19 so much as just public alcohol consumption. All of a sudden, after all of this time, is now a concern in Japan. So they're cracking down on that primarily. They've got a list based on the size of facilities and so on. They've talked about how they will be asking places to close, which will include game centers, shopping centers, planetariums, large-scale sort of department stores, zoos, parks. They're actually asking parks to close, places that can be large, places where lots of people can get together, as well as restaurants, as well as places that allow karaoke or serve alcohol will all need to shut down. They're actually doing a lot, and they're allowing certain other places, for example, that take appropriate measures to remain open, but for shorter hours. For schools, they are encouraging people to go to online classes, but they're allowing schools to remain. In fact, the guidance actually in one place, I believe Osaka, was talking about how, yes, they want students as much as possible to do classes online and remotely, but to everyone to come to school, to have school lunches in the cafeteria together. Kind of does make sense to the extent that there are impoverished families and working families. If you don't let the kids go to eat at school, then parents have to take time off work to look after the kids and feed them at home. But you could say that the whole aim or the whole goal of having them study online and remotely to avoid them giving coronavirus to each other, you're sort of undermining the benefits of that by having them go in. The other thing, of course, is that school lunches in Japan are a major leveler against poverty and so on as well. So kind of complicated there. A bunch of other silliness, but that's the main drive of the COVID emergency. There's a final aspect of this I'll talk about at the end of the night, but yes, that's what's going on with that. We've hit the hour, so I'm going to accelerate. I see Quint Rankid, I've heard that the 8 p.m. closing time results in huge crowding at that time. Is that right? I don't know. I don't know. I know that it does mean that people sort of rush in and rush out. It reminds me of the binge drinking culture that we had in New Zealand from places that had to like close at 5 p.m. It just increased the frequency and speed of drinking. But yeah. I don't know the cause of that. Certainly, the idea that you can't catch coronavirus at lunchtime is a bit silly. But yeah. Lysander 45, good to see you, and Kareem Nishkor, good to have you back as well. I'm going to pile through this story. It turned out that at the Tokyo Women's Medical University Hospital, they are dealing with coronavirus. They're dealing with increasing like workloads and stress. They are collapsing. They're basically unable to carry on. They're exhausted from overwork. And to top it all off, the hospital told them all that none of them would receive summer bonuses, which resulted in more than 100 doctors at once at the hospital saying that they were fed up and they all quit at the same time. Over 100 doctors quit from a significant university hospital within Tokyo. Tokyo Women's Medical University, I believe, is the TWMU. And good on them. But this is what's happening. Because the hospitals make their income off elective surgeries, basically the hospitals are losing their sources of income, and the government is not giving them extra pay to give to the medical workers, and the medical workers are just being sort of abused for all of their hard work, and basically more than 100 just decided to quit. At the same time, however, though, the Olympics still are saying that in order to host the Olympics, they will need 10,000 volunteer medical workers from Tokyo Prefecture for the Olympics, even though right now, I mean, apart from having mass resignations of overworked and stressed out medical workers from one university hospital, Tokyo is going to be in the middle of another wave and trying to vaccinate people. So again, how are they going to find 10,000 doctors to support the Olympics? And if they do, that has to mean that they're going to be taking people away from vaccinating people, because we're still going to be in the middle of vaccinating, and they're going to be taking people away from looking after patients when right now all the hospitals are short-staffed to the point that people are quitting. So that's a ridiculous thing that's happening right now. Awesome story that the new ISS commander is going to be this fella, Japanese Akihiko Hoshide. Just went up in the reused. I mean, awesome. I love watching the launch of the SpaceX rocket, which was on a reused Falcon booster rocket and a Dragon capsule, which had also been used before. So I thought that was awesome. Odie Jr., good to see you, and way late, boom, but better late than never, as they say. So that was awesome that they pulled that off. Thanks again to Aaron. Hey, Philip, thanks again to Aaron for the editing the short cutouts from last week on Fukushima. In fact, kind of two there, but yeah, and of course the Duke of Edinburgh rant. I mean, I like the guy. He's a old racist fun uncle who gets to shag the Queen for a job for a long time. I mean, who would have thought that she would have lived that long? So, you know, and I must admit, I watched The Crown and I thought, yeah, seems like a good enough guy. But I thought it was ridiculous how much attention his passing got. So, yes, I was glad to rant about that. This is just a story again about how people are, how the government's just more or less, talking about how the crackdown on people drinking in the street is kind of, people are pushing back again. Mostly, again, Japan's got a kind of a closeted alcoholic culture. The idea of alcoholism as an actual disease that people struggle with isn't really as acknowledged here as it is in other places. And I suppose that banning alcohol consumption in many places is going to push that to the fore. Mentioned all of that. Another great thing, this whole thing, Voices of the Past, I've recommended this before. They have a new episode up today. An account of the first ever Japanese embassy in Rome. They actually traveled all through Europe in the 16th century, 1582 to 1590. And they left a written account. Of course, because of the later crackdown on Catholicism, they were Catholic before they went over there. And because of the shogunate's crackdown on Catholicism in Japan, they all ended up, the people who were the ambassadors in Europe, they ended up sort of paupers at the end. But they had an amazing experience. Again, the first sort of real interaction between Japan and Portugal, Spain and Rome. But fantastic episode. Again, all audio, but highly recommended if you're into that sort of history. yeah, this guy, the fact I don't even remember his name is half of the problem, but he's the governor of Kanagawa, the number 2 prefecture in Japan, not Osaka. But again, the reason no one remembers that Kanagawa is the number 2 prefecture and not Osaka is because their Oyaji gag game just isn't up to Osaka's. The idea that calling Golden Week this week has to be called Gaman Week, what's gaman? Gaman's like tolerating, like not even what's the right word? Toughing it out week. Yeah, it's a nice Oyaji gag, but seriously, I mean, if you want to see comedy, Osaka has everyone beat. Osaka has asked that they've said that Universal Studios Japan doesn't have to shut down, but they're not allowed to let any customers in. Kings of comedy. I mean, Osaka, nobody can beat Osaka on comedy, which they proved there. So a couple of other things. Apparently New York Times and CNN have been doing a big feature lately on how QAnon is somehow big in Japan. Now look, there are nuts in Japan, and 127 million people. So, if you're going to get certain, and if you want to find, I mean, you can find even on YouTube people who wear MAGA hats and claim to be Trump supporters and whatnot. If you go looking for them, you can find them every street corner, not every street corner, but you can see the religious cult people on corners. You can see the anti-vax, 4 or 5 Oji-sons standing in Shibuya saying that, they're going to turn us into 5G tent poles. Just because these people are there, and this is the same thing with the right-wingers as well. People see right-wingers in front of stations and they must be really big in Japan. And no, they're standing in front of the stations because they are fringe and they're desperate for attention. So if you go looking for anything in Japan, if you wanted to find, any fringe conspiracy, you'll find a supporter for it in Japan, because Japan just has a lot of shut-in, nerd weirdos. It's 127 million people. So yeah, CNN pointed out that there are some accounts in Japan that promote QAnon. Now, most people in Japan, why would you give a shit about the idea that Donald Trump is a superhero saving the world, from the American deep state? Who gives a crap? Seriously, like, why would anyone care? Of course, there are people who would care and maybe get into it as like some sort of a fringe hobby or something like that. But the idea that QAnon is big in Japan and that this is being promoted by New York Times and CNN, this is what drives me crazy about reporting about Japan, is that you get, again, this wouldn't pass a fact check in any other country, but you can get away with it for Japan because Japan is still so mysterious and weird and people believe anything that you say about it. And when you publish crap like this is why I don't trust CNN anymore, and it drives me crazy, not just because I enjoy reading news and I like to see good quality reporting and not just cheap lazy crap like this, which is all that CNN's become the last 20 years. But the other thing that drives me crazy about it is that then it becomes a tool when you have the people who come out and point at them and say, oh, look at them, they're the fake news, and they actually want to promote mistrust of information and news. These people are enabling that they're by putting out actual fake news. They're actually they're putting themselves in the position to be abused for that because they're doing it. And that's what drives me crazy about this. I mean, I'm sure if you want to find, bloody Manson family fans in Japan, I'm sure you could find a couple. I'm sure you could find, fans of cannibalism. You could find anything, and but the idea of putting a story, finding like a couple of people and saying that it's big in Japan happens too often, and it annoys me. So that's a thing. Japan is doing very, very badly at vaccinating. I think somebody pointed this out. Oh yeah, this is the thing I was talking about earlier about the why Japan doesn't have a plan for the number of when to get vaccines actually like delivered to people, not just the supply. I mentioned that earlier. That is the Tokyo. That is it. That is all the topics. I'm 9 minutes over, and I thought I went super fast tonight. So anyway, that is the thing. Steve from Berkeley, to think QAnon is a thing in the US is equally BS. Yeah. I mean, let me put it this way. You're not going to see the Diet getting raided like it's been before by people wearing T-shirts with that written on it. But again, you could sit from here and certainly get the impression that like 75 million Americans believe in it, which I know isn't representative of most people who vote for Republicans. But, yeah, this is part of the big problem, I guess. Santa Cruz, Sleepy314, good to have you joining us. I am done. Thomas H., good to see you. In fact, let's just do a final scan for names. I think I saw Philip R. earlier and said hello, but good to see you all. No problems with the late boom. Odie Jr., good to have you with us. And everybody else, thank you for joining me. I did go 10 minutes over, even though I did try to talk really, really fast and get through it. But this is what's going on in Japan at the moment, as far as I can see. Yeah, Quint Ranked, he knows what's going on. Hit the like button. It does help. I do appreciate it. Remember, I'll be back here next week after this. It's actually not quite so voluntary as before. It looks like it will have some teeth that they're asking places to close down, but a lot of places are saying that they won't, so we'll see how that goes. I'll give you the update on that, as well as all the other stuff that's going on in Japan. It's great to see you all, and thank you for joining me and a little taste of what's going on in this part of the world. I hope everything is good with you all and what's going on in your part of the world. Remember, as always, you can follow me on Twitter. And see you later. Have a good week, everybody. And boom, peace. Kaikitano. Ollie Olsen. Probably only Guys English World understands that, and that's only if you're an old New Zealander. I'll see you all later. Have a good week.